Child Protection Services, or CPS. Two words that evoke a sense of safety, a promise to shield vulnerable children from harm. Yet behind this facade of protection lies a troubling reality. CPS agencies, often operating with unchecked power, have been accused of tearing families apart, particularly immigrant families, under questionable circumstances. Instead of being a last resort, CPS intervention has become increasingly common, often driven by dubious allegations and cultural misunderstandings. This raises a crucial question. Is CPS truly protecting children or perpetuating a system that punishes families, particularly those already marginalized? A closer look at CPS practices reveals a system riddled with flaws. Overburdened caseworkers, operating within a culture of fear and suspicion, often prioritize removing children over preserving families. Cultural differences are often misinterpreted as neglect, leading to unnecessary interventions. For immigrant families, language barriers and unfamiliarity with the legal system exacerbate these challenges, making them easy targets for a system that seems more focused on control than on support. This lack of cultural sensitivity and due diligence has devastating consequences, leaving families traumatized and children separated from their loved ones. The case of Norway's Barnevernet, the country's child protection agency, provides a chilling example of CPS overreach. Barnevernet has faced international criticism for its aggressive practice of removing children from their homes, often based on flimsy evidence or subjective interpretations of child welfare. Cases involving immigrant families, particularly those from Eastern Europe and Asia, have raised concerns about cultural bias and discrimination. These cases highlight the dangerous potential for CPS agencies to operate with unchecked power, prioritizing state intervention over family preservation. The trauma inflicted on families by such practices is immeasurable, leaving lasting scars on both parents and children. This is not just a problem confined to Norway. Similar concerns have been raised about CPS agencies across the developed world, from the United States to Australia. The common thread is a system that often operates with a lack of transparency and accountability, leaving families vulnerable to its arbitrary and often life-altering decisions. It is imperative that we scrutinize these practices and demand reforms that prioritize family preservation and ensure that interventions are justified, culturally sensitive, and in the best interests of the child. We must strive for a system that truly protects children while respecting the fundamental rights of families. The story of Sagarika Chakraborty, an Indian immigrant living in Norway, exemplifies the human cost of CPS overreach. In 2011, Barnevernet removed Chakraborty's two young children, a 5-year-old son and a 1-year-old daughter, from her custody. The agency's justification? They alleged that Chakraborty was feeding her son with her hands, a common cultural practice in India, which they deemed force-feeding. This seemingly innocuous act, viewed through the lens of cultural ignorance, became grounds for a protracted legal battle that would span years and continents. Chakraborty's case quickly gained international attention, becoming a rallying point for critics of Barnevernet and its seemingly draconian practices. The Indian government got involved, labeling the agency's actions as cultural bias and demanding the children's return. Despite mounting pressure and a lack of concrete evidence of abuse or neglect, Barnevernet remained unyielding. Chakraborty's children were placed in foster care, separated from their parents, their culture, and their language. The emotional toll on both mother and children was immeasurable. Years turned into a painful waiting game for Chakraborty as she fought tirelessly to reunite with her children. The case became a complex legal quagmire, mired in jurisdictional disputes and cultural misunderstandings. The Indian government continued to provide diplomatic support, but progress was agonizingly slow. Chakraborty's story became a cautionary tale, highlighting the vulnerability of immigrant families navigating a foreign child welfare system that often seems stacked against them. The Chakraborty case underscores the urgent need for greater cross-cultural understanding and sensitivity within CPS agencies. Arbitrary removals based on cultural differences are not only unjust, but also deeply damaging to children and families. The trauma of family separation can have long-lasting consequences, affecting a child's sense of identity, security, and well-being. It is imperative that CPS agencies prioritize family preservation and adopt culturally sensitive practices that respect the diversity of the families they serve. Children deserve to grow up in a loving and supportive environment, rooted in their cultural heritage. While the human cost of CPS overreach is undeniable, there's another disturbing aspect to consider: the financial incentives that often drive these practices. In many Western countries, including the United States, CPS agencies receive government funding tied to the number of children in their care. This creates a perverse incentive to remove children from their homes, even in cases where such intervention may not be warranted. The more children in the system, the more funding the agency receives, effectively creating a child welfare industrial complex that profits from the separation of families. This financial incentive structure raises serious ethical concerns. When the well-being of children becomes intertwined with the financial interests of government agencies, there is a clear conflict of interest. This can lead to a focus on removing children from their homes, even in cases where less intrusive measures, such as family counseling or financial assistance, might be more appropriate and beneficial. The system, skewed by financial incentives, becomes less about protecting children and more about perpetuating its own existence. Furthermore, the flow of funds within the child welfare system often extends beyond government agencies. Private foster care agencies, lawyers, and other stakeholders all benefit from the current system. This creates a powerful network of vested interests that often resist reform efforts. Challenging the status quo means challenging a system that is financially lucrative for many, making it even more difficult to advocate for change. The financial incentives embedded within the child welfare system create a breeding ground for abuse and exploitation. When the focus shifts from protecting children to maintaining a steady stream of revenue, families become commodities, and children become pawns in a system driven by profit rather than compassion. This is unacceptable. We must demand transparency and accountability in CPS funding, and dismantle the perverse incentives that prioritize profit over the well-being of children and families. Eroding trust, the devastating impact on communities. The overreach of CPS agencies has far-reaching consequences, eroding trust in government institutions and fracturing the social fabric of communities. When families, particularly those already marginalized, live in fear of having their children taken away based on flimsy evidence or cultural misunderstandings, it creates a climate of fear and suspicion. This undermines social cohesion and makes it less likely for families to seek help when they need it, fearing that reaching out for assistance could lead to further scrutiny and potential separation. The impact on immigrant communities is particularly devastating. Already facing language barriers, cultural differences, and the challenges of adapting to a new environment, immigrant families are often viewed with suspicion by a system that often fails to understand their customs and traditions. This can lead to a sense of alienation and distrust, making it even more challenging for immigrants to integrate into their new communities and access the support they need. The erosion of trust extends beyond individual families. When communities witness the arbitrary and often unjust actions of CPS agencies, it undermines their faith in the very institutions that are supposed to protect and support them. This can lead to a breakdown in the social contract, fostering a sense of cynicism and despair. People become less likely to report genuine cases of child abuse or neglect, fearing that their concerns will be misconstrued or that they will become entangled in a system that seems more intent on punishing families than on helping them. Rebuilding trust requires a fundamental shift in how we approach child welfare. We must move away from a system that prioritizes state intervention and towards one that empowers families and communities to support their most vulnerable members. This requires investing in preventative services, such as affordable childcare, parenting classes, and mental health support that address the root causes of child abuse and neglect. It also requires ensuring that CPS agencies operate with transparency, accountability, and cultural sensitivity, treating families with respect and dignity. Seeking justice, a call for reform and accountability. The injustices perpetrated by overreaching CPS agencies demand a collective call for reform and accountability. We must demand greater transparency and oversight of CPS practices, ensuring that decisions to remove children from their homes are made with due diligence, based on credible evidence, and not on cultural bias or financial incentives. This includes implementing stricter guidelines for removing children, requiring court orders based on concrete evidence of abuse or neglect, and ensuring that parents have access to legal representation throughout the process. Successful legal battles against CPS overreach, such as the case of Doreen Griffith in the United States, offer a glimmer of hope and a roadmap for change. Griffith, a mother wrongfully accused of medical neglect, fought back against the system and ultimately won a landmark legal victory that helped to expose the flawed practices of CPS agencies. Her case highlights the importance of challenging injustice, raising awareness, and advocating for systemic reform. Several key reforms can help to create a more just and equitable child welfare system. These include ending the financial incentives that encourage removing children from their homes. Funding should be redirected towards family preservation programs and community-based support services that address the root causes of child abuse and neglect. Implementing mandatory cultural sensitivity training for all CPS workers. This training should be developed and delivered in consultation with diverse communities, ensuring that CPS workers understand the cultural practices and beliefs of the families they serve. Establishing independent oversight committees to review CPS cases and investigate allegations of misconduct. These committees should be composed of community members, legal experts, and child welfare advocates, ensuring accountability and transparency. The protection of children should be a paramount concern for any society. However, true child protection cannot come at the expense of families' fundamental rights. We must strive for a system that prioritizes both the safety and well-being of children and the preservation of families. By demanding reform, holding CPS agencies accountable, and advocating for policies that support families, we can create a world where children are truly protected and families are respected and empowered. Cases like the Nikolaev family, who faced wrongful accusations and fought to keep their child, Kiara Harris in Erie County, who was targeted for homeschooling her children, and Marianne Godboldo, who stood against the Michigan Department of Human Services to protect her daughter, underscore the urgent need for reform and accountability in CPS practices.